at ya, at ya. Tell you what's master, coming at ya, coming at ya. Rhyme style disaster, coming at ya, at ya. Tell you what's master.
Welcome to another episode of Cut the Bull. I am Wilfred Reilly, along with co-host, as always, Charles Love, and a full panel of people. We've got Christy Kelly, Brooks Crenshaw, both lovely and talented, as always. And today we are interviewing Colin Wright, who many of us are doing some business with, but who's also always doing a lot of things in the public square. So Colin, welcome to the panel. Welcome to Cut the Bull.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, have you been on this particular podcast before?
I think I was back
It's
in
one of the
maybe like the
earlies.
COVID days, probably. I think I was
It
at
was like probably
in Sacramento when
episode
that happened.
8, 9, 10, somewhere early around
Yeah,
in
I
there.
was early
I
on.
think so. Yeah, we looked and yeah, I think you were one of the. It was literally it's like it's a single number, like one of the first Mastercards type
Oh
things.
wow.
Okay, so for a newer and larger audience, Dr. Wright, what's your background? Where do you come from? What's your research interest in academia? Where origins, that type of thing? Villain origin
Yeah,
story.
yeah. I mean, a lot has happened since my first episode here. So, going back even before that. So, I used to be an academic evolutionary biologist. I went to undergrad at UC Davis. I got my PhD at UC Santa Barbara. I did a postdoc at Penn State. I left Penn State in 2020 because I started, kind of poking a lot of these ideas they have in my departments that were kind of cherished by the left about biological sex being a spectrum, or maybe there's 5 sexes, or maybe sex is a total social construct and people can change their sex, and something about clownfish. And so I started just sort of writing articles that were addressing these type of questions, being like, actually, this is not the case. People are just wrong about the science here. Spilling it out like, a biologist would normally do, you'd expect an academic to do. And then I got a lot of crazy pushback from that. Not scientific pushback, but just calling me a bigot, all that stuff. I ended up leaving academia. It's kind of a long story. I worked for Quillette for a little bit. I worked for the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism for a little bit. Now I work at the Manhattan Institute. I'm a fellow there. I work specifically on the policy side of things. I guess the claim to fame I have recently is I defined what sex and male and female were for the entire federal government just last year, a couple months ago. And I'm just working on getting biological reality back into the federal government, into law, and pushing back against sort of the pseudoscience behind what we would, I guess, call gender affirming care in pediatrics.
And I guess my second and kind of only question for a while as we flip to the panel, and we're going to talk about a bunch of things like DEI, some consulting, almost all of us are doing actually, so on. But like, what I guess is the argument that sex is a spectrum? I mean, now I'm somewhat profane sometimes on this panel. I'm not going to be today, but like most of us began dating in high school. It seems fairly obvious that there are two sexes. You notice the differences pretty early on. Yeah.
Yeah.
How could there, what's the claim that there aren't?
I mean, there's several. So it is bizarre, just that mammals, being the mammals that we are, we could even like make such a claim like that. Because
Yeah, like
our
if you invest in
existence,
horses here in
our very
Kentucky.
existence is dependent on the fact that there's 2 sexes. I actually had a recent article in the academic journal Archives of Sexual Behavior, and it's titled "Why There Are Exactly 2 Sexes," and it goes through. There's probably 20 arguments I would say that I've seen of slight variations that about why sex is a non-binary attribute, but I kind of boiled them down to these 5 main categories. And people will, confuse things like mating types you see in fungi with sexes. They'll look at sort of genital morphology and say like, well, some people have ambiguous genitals. That means, their sex is ambiguous. It's on a continuum, and therefore male and female are just like these statistical norms rather than like, strict categories, binary categories. People have these what I call polythetic models, where it's just kind of a collection of traits, and if you have statistically more or less of them, then you're statistically more or less male or female. There's multi-level models of non-binary sex. There's just so many. They're all kind of self-defeating because they all kind of reference the maleness and femaleness. And so if you have traits and you're coding them as being a kind of a male trait or a female trait, then you have to have an understanding of what male and female is outside of the trait itself. And so they're all self-refuting, self-defeating, circular often. But there's just a lot of them, and a lot of people take it really seriously, and it's actually having tremendous impacts on society and in people's lives. So that's why I choose to address it.
Okay, obviously everyone else on the panel is a very competent adult, but I mean, so hey, ask whatever you want. But I mean, Charles, you got any thoughts on the idea that there are multiple sexes, 4 or 5 of them? You
I
have a
have a
kid. I
few.
mean, I produced the usual way, I'd suppose. Well, what do you think?
Well, I would say, and we're probably going to get into some of the things that Colin said he wrote about in that article, and he's really brilliant and good at this because he's been doing it for a while. And I'm sure I haven't read the article, but I'm sure he did a fascinating breakdown of all of their implausible arguments. I really like to focus on two very extreme portions of it. One is, and we can talk about this in detail because I think it's important. One is how so many people can be convinced to believe things they didn't believe before. So what I mean your people who don't fall into the category, who have not been making that argument for years. You know, people like Barack Obama who said that I'm against gay marriage, right? All these people who said, you know, marriage is between a man and a woman, and they clearly knew what male and female was 3 years ago, right? And now they're vehemently arguing that it's on a spectrum. So not the people who believe it, you know, not the people who are just trying to get, excuse me, trying to get, I mean, because a lot of people do that, right? I have this belief, and so if I can normalize it, that's fine. But how do you get people who vocally, openly said that this was ridiculous, you know, 3 years to 4 years before, are now like fighting you on social media saying that you're a bigot for thinking what they thought 3 weeks ago, and that these people are older, you know, 30s, 40s, and 50s. That's odd. And the
Yeah.
other thing that's fascinating to me are the people who, you know, my thing, and Will makes fun of me sometimes, like, give them the argument. Let's assume there's 98 genders. Let's assume that it's all fluid and all that stuff. That's fine. So if there's so many, no, there's two, but if you're off by 96 and there's 98 and it's fluid, how is it, this is my favorite one, how is it just happen to be that every time some trans, let me make sure I get them right, trans woman uh is living as a trans woman, the go-to is the most extreme stereotype and gender norms that they hate. So they're wearing fishnets, they got big boobs, they got, you know, the wild stripper makeup. It's always the extreme of what
Yeah.
most people would think is feminine. So if they're so fluid, why none of them anywhere in the middle? They're all extremely over the top, exaggerated female. And there's such a large number of people who know this is BS, and they'll fight you to the death saying that it's not all of a sudden. Those are my two.
Okay, so there's a couple of things. So I think that I'll address the second one first of why we see trans women maybe donning the more stereotypical extreme femininity rather than just like, you know, the stuff that someone's mom might just wear. There's probably two reasons for that. One is because there's two pathways that males go down when they that are causal to them wanting to transition. One of them is called like the homosexual transsexual pathway, which is extremely feminine men who are same-sex attracted. That's one pathway. It's just like extraordinarily flamboyantly feminine men. And then the other pathway is men who aren't particularly feminine themselves. Didn't have like a childhood history of sex non-conforming behavior, but they have what's called autogynephilia, which is sort of this arousal of imagining themselves as women. And so
Mhm.
you can see that those people tend to be the most in your face, stereotypical, you know, huge fake breasts they're putting on there. And that's
Mhm.
mainly because there is a sexual fetishistic side for those transvestic fetishists, the AGP side of things. Now, I
Mhm.
mean, I think the feminine, you know, the homosexual, transsexual pathway, you can get the exaggerated looks as well too. I mean, maybe some of that could be explained by the fact that I mean, these are males and they look male, and so they kind of try to overcompensate for the fact that they have all these male features by just dolling themselves up as much as they possibly can to try to mask over that type of thing. So I think
Mhm.
both those pathways can lead to just kind of like really stereotypical norms, but you tend to get like the really extremes with that transvestic fetishistic side of things. A
Right.
little less so with the homosexual transsexual one. As for the claim about how did so many people get, duped by this idea that there's more than two sexes, or it's a spectrum or a social construct, it's really truly bizarre. I think a lot of it is that they've attached this claim, which is really just like, can people change sex, all this stuff. What is sex? Their sex is real. These should just be normal, like scientific claims. These are just empirical claims, but they've attached like moral valence on to what should just be a matter of empiricism. And so, again, when I first started pushing back against this stuff in academia, as a scientist, making just basic scientific arguments, I wasn't getting scientific arguments back. I was getting, you're a bigoted, transphobic person talking, far right, white supremacist, all, they just throw everything at you. And so they really think that you're a bad person if you believe these types of things. So it's not just like for them a matter of just like, is this true or not? Like there's a lot of internal conflict of accepting this type of truth, that they're going to associate themselves with being bad people. And then the scientists aren't doing any favors by muddying the waters of what sex actually is and conflating it with secondary sex traits and actually getting these arguments published in real scientific journals. And so people can just kind of point to this and be like, oh yeah, it's really complex, and think that they're, in line with the science when they're couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah. One other comment. Can you guys hear me, by the way? Okay, great. One other comment I think is that a lot of people probably don't believe this. I mean, so we don't need to
That
go
makes it
into like,
worse, though.
yeah, no, that absolutely is worse. I can't stand cowards, but like this isn't particularly scientific. But I mean, for one of my books, I mean, you've all heard me drone on about this, but I did the one thing. I was on social media. I added SurveyMonkey. I surveyed like 3,000 people. I asked them, "Do you actually believe some women have penises?" Rather than asking an ambiguous question like, "Should trans girls play with their gender rather than their sex?" And I have a pretty bro, but also very feminist audience, everyone's girlfriend or wife. And I thought it'd be 70-30. It was 98-2. I mean, all of these business women were just absolutely saying no. And they were messaging me offline and saying, like, look, don't share my name and picture. But of course, I don't believe that. But I'm an executive at Ann Taylor. I can't say that. So I think that's why you see the tide turn so quickly with a lot of the woke stuff, just like you would if the actual alt position ever took over. Like a lot of people who just have normal jobs, you make enough that you live in a pleasant area, but not enough that you can say exactly what you want. You just play along with whatever the stupid trend is currently. I don't have a lot of respect for that, but I assume that went on in traditional Catholic and Hindu and so on societies. You go down to the temple and you make puja. It's just what you do because you don't want to be shamed in public. That's probably an old and very well evolved human instinct. But Christy, you're a woman. I could make some stupid joke like "so it seems," but I won't. I mean, what do you think about this as a lady? We had these guys that, in all probability, very often have some kind of odd fetish that were able to say, "I'm a woman," and everyone was just totally non-resistant to this for a period of 10 or 12 years. What's your take?
So I wonder, I was telling Colin, I was listening to him on Joe Rogan's show, and I think 5 times Joe just kept saying, "How does this end? Like, where are we going? Like, when do we get off of this crazy ride?" And that's kind of like where I'm at. Like, where is the natural progression of this? I mean, you would have thought it would have died down by now. So I guess that's one question is, do we, because I think woke is kind of going by the wayside. It is dying down some. Are we seeing this the same? I think so. Are we seeing this the same with the trans stuff? Are we seeing it kind of starting to die down, or is it still just as powerful as ever? And then I guess my other question is, you used to be a progressive. So how do we speak to progressives about this issue and get them to listen? Because you would think they would resonate with, you're erasing, women with the whole trans movement, or protecting girls or protecting girl spaces. You would think that, but they get offended by that. So how do we speak to the left, and where is this going? How does it end?
So I think me having come from the left, I've tried to use the principles that at least I felt would define me as someone on the left, against them now, to try to like hold up this mirror to them and say like, you're violating your own principles on these things. I mean, I had an article in Newsweek several years ago that was like, you can't claim to be the party of women's rights if you don't know what a woman is. And so I mean, I think that kind of just like sums it up. Like they try to have all the like when they enter in the abortion debate, it used to be like, you're a man, you can't, have any opinion on this type of stuff. And now it's just like, well, now men can get pregnant according to them. So I guess, they've lost that argument. They can't claim to be this party of women's rights if women don't exist as a real biological category, worthy of rights, or if anyone can just self-identify into those categories and take over women's spaces and use their sex-based rights for them. It just doesn't work. It just completely collapses, when you first just, on first contact with reality. So I try to do that. I also try to say how, the main targets of gender ideology, of kids being trans, are these sex non-conforming kids who, if left alone, all the data shows they would just grow up to be these healthy, happy, gay adults, gay men and lesbian women. But instead, they're being put down like this medical pathway. Like it's literally just a kind of, I think it's a kind of gay conversion therapy, but rather than, the traditional kind that conservatives, we're gonna shock you and try to make your brain match your body. Now they're just saying like, well, no, we can now modify your body to match your brain. It's like two different pathways to the same thing. And so I'm just like, you're the party that's against gay conversion therapy. Well, this is probably the most egregious type of gay conversion therapy I can ever imagine, because you're literally telling little feminine boys that they're actually girls, and tomboy girls that they're actually boys, literally, and that there's this problem can be fixed, it can be medicalized, and we can make your body align with your gender identity or your brain sex. So that's what I try to do to convince people on the left, that they're going down a dark path. What was the first question that you asked? I can't remember
How do we get off of this crazy ride?
how do
Where
we
does
get
it
off?
end?
I think it's going to be mainly with lawsuits. I know there's some big lawsuits coming out next year. I mean, Chloe Cole has some lawsuits that might go to trial. There is one that is going to go to trial that's a detransitioner that hasn't even been announced yet, so I can't really give any details on that yet. But it's gonna come down to these big cases that give big payouts to people who are harmed by this type of medical practice. I think we're already seeing a lot of progress on like the trans sports debate, where a lot of these big sporting bodies are coming out saying, we're banning males competing in here. You have to do a cheek swab. We need to see if you have a Y chromosome, all that stuff, which is very good. But we are seeing, if you look at just like the demographics, like whatever the generation's called that's younger than Gen Z, it's still record numbers of people, of kids who are identifying as something other than the sex that they actually are. So we're not seeing any pullback from that. I'm not sure if there will be, at least culturally, in the way they identify. Maybe I'm hoping that we do start seeing a dip as it maybe becomes lame to identify as non-binary or something. But right now, if we can just sort of mitigate the effects of this ideology and like transing kids in medicine and in sports, we can kind of maybe try to contain it. And so I think that's kind of what we're doing now.
Yep. There's a possible question for Christy there at some point. I mean, I have a background as pretty good counsel, but Christy's actually a practicing civil lawyer. Like, can you successfully sue these doctors if you agree to something that's an accepted medical practice at the time? But we've got Brooks waiting in the corner. Brooks Crenshaw, what do you think about all this? 2 sexes, 88 sexes?
Well, so like the data on what Colin was referring to, like is out with regard to regret, and the fact that the minors that have transitioned, the overwhelming majority regret the decision. And I think it was in one study, in the 70s for men. Is that right? Something to that effect.
I don't know if we have great data on like regret anyway, because we just don't have good like cohort studies of like tracking kids who are, were put on blockers and stuff when transition and then came off of it. That's what we're lacking. We're lacking like the long-term data. And in many cases, like in England, the UK, their NHS, they're refusing to give like the data on the kids who moved on out of pediatrics into the adult medicine. And so like, they're withholding this data for whatever reason. So there's no reason to suggest the regrets rates are as low as like 1% that you try to see them say constantly, because we got like people huge dropout rates, the weird definitions they have of what it means to be trans. Chloe Cole wouldn't even qualify as a detransitioner under the definitions in a lot of those papers. So, yeah, there's this kind of like a lot of unknown, I guess, with actual
And,
regret rates,
and
but it's
they're
higher than
ignoring a lot of
1%.
them too. I know when we had Chloe and Luca on that weekend, they were having a march in Sacramento, and they basically just acted like they didn't exist. We had a guest on after that who was pro the transition. We were debating that, and they said detransitioners don't exist, right? They just
No
simply
such
just
thing.
ignore them.
Yeah,
It's just
if I
one
could
more
ask,
stop on their gender journey is what how they try to portray it.
Right.
there also seems to be a methods question, and Colin, I want to see if you'll correct this, but like the one time I read one of these papers recently, the whole issue was that the instrument was administered in the office of like the gender doctor. And if you were a detransitioner, you wouldn't ever go there because you're suing them. So,
Back to the same
Yeah.
like,
doctor.
if you go to like r/dtrans, there are 80,000 people on the Reddit, and there only seem to be like 300,000 people that have ever gone through these full surgeries. So you can kind of draw your own conclusions there, but none of those people could logically ever be tracked. Is that roughly accurate?
Yeah, I mean, every detransitioner I've ever literally, it's a lot of them. I mean, my girlfriend Christina, she has talked to over 95 of them for a study that she's actively engaged in. And she asked them straight up, like, have you gone back to report your detransition to your doctor? And none of them have gone back. A lot of them, they are traumatized. They feel betrayed by these people. They were lied to. Their parents were lied to. They want nothing to do, not even just with their former doctor, but with the medical establishment at all, because they just, they're totally burned by the whole system, in a way that's completely irreparable. And so, yeah, they're not just like calling up their doc and just like I'm detransitioning. It's not like that. It's just like they just disappear from the map
And we jumped
altogether.
on Brooks' point, so I want to let him
Well,
finish. But I
so
do
so
want to
the
say
studies
that
out
was one of the
the
most
studies out.
fascinating things about interviewing Luca, because I didn't think about it until it happened, where they said, "Well, you cannot go to any other doctor." Like Colin said, you don't want to go to that doctor. But yeah, I think it was Luca who said she went to another doctor. And they're like, "I'm not touching that, right? You're not going to jump in the. I mean, it wasn't enough of the surgeries. They don't have experience in it, so they're not going to correct it. So the only person they can go to is the butcher who basically did this to them. So they don't have any other options, right? And then, like Colin said, they're not going to want to go to them, so that eliminates those numbers there. Go ahead, Brooks. I'm sorry.
So the studies I was referring to, one is a follow-up study of boys with gender identity disorder, and the other one is psychosexual outcome of gender dysphoric children. And there is some data with regard to outcomes and those that didn't transition that became healthy gay adults, as you referred to, and
Yeah.
there is some that transitioned that would not have after the fact. And I can send you those, but that's what I was referring to. But
Yeah.
a lot of these arguments that they make, and I think you may have posted this, Colin. It was someone born without legs, and therefore, hey, we're not bipedal. Legs are on a spectrum, right? It's the exception that proves the rule. And I mean, a lot of this goes back to Solzhenitsyn with regard to accepting a lie. Like, this is the point, as a military guy. I was in survival, evasion, resistance, escape training, SEER training. And one of the things that they do with you in the concentration camp setting is they work on you. And one of the things that they get you to do early is to get everybody to repeat something they know is not true. And that's the first step. And once you do that, control is a lot easier. And, everybody on this panel knows the background on queer theory, and the fact that queer theory's objective is to abolish all societal norms on principle. And the Qs have been using the Ts as a battering ram on societal norms. And when you know that, you can see it everywhere. This is Musashi. When you know the way broadly, you see it in all things. You can see what's happening. And a lot of this is about accepting something you know not to be true and making Thanksgiving awkward. Right? Like,
Yeah.
I can go to Thanksgiving dinner and say, "What is a woman?" And the room goes, right? and there's one half that wants to go along to get along, kind of limbic like, and the other half that won't cede the truth. They will not cede the language, and that's a really important distinction.
Yeah, I mean, I've had these debates with people, and I know people like Carol Hooven, who I don't know if you've had her on the show before, but she's great. She's talked to people like Augustin Fuentes, who's one of the most egregious biologist out there pushing the sex is a spectrum stuff. And, in person, when, she had a private meeting with this person, he basically would agree with everything that she's saying. And then he'd be on a podcast the next week and just going against everything that they had previously discussed. So, I mean, there's some of it that's just like an obvious grift. There's some like true believers who are just, out to lunch. And then there's just a lot of people who, haven't really paid too much attention. They're just kind of going off like, oh, well, there was a paper in Nature that said sex is a spectrum, and who am I to doubt this type of stuff? So, yeah, a lot of what I'm doing is just trying to like clean up this mess and just address these arguments as clearly as possible. Fortunately, I've been able to get some stuff in actual scientific journals now. It's getting a little easier to do that, whereas before, I'd message journal editors like, would you take a letter to the editor responding to this thing, and just like get ghosted by all these journals. But now, they're actually reaching out to me to be like, can you, give your arguments here, because they're no longer going to get canceled if they publish sort of an article on why there's only two sexes anymore, as you would have in 2020.
So you posted recently a paper, and we all know the trajectory here, right? When the papers start, 10, 15 years ago, it was the trans thing, and the papers were coming out, and that worked its way into mainstream. Now you posted the ASA paper on, I forget the title, but it's basically mainstreaming minor attraction.
Yeah. So I post so many of those crazy papers, the queer theory papers and stuff from journals. I mean, there's been women who were marrying brine shrimp in the Utah's Great Salt Lake, and that was in an ecology journal of all places. It was just weird, performance art masquerading as legitimate science. There's ones about queering babies. There's ones about trans robot cyborg dogs. I mean, these are in like Springer Nature journals. I try to highlight a lot of the more absurd ones online because they're just everywhere. If you look up, if you just go to Google Scholar and type in queer and then sort by date, it's just a constant stream of nonsense coming out daily.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I think we're going to move on to the DEI topic a little bit. One thing I will say, Brooks actually had a very important point there, which is that there's almost a brainwashing element to this, right? So like one thing that I don't think gets touched on enough is that there can be a level at which people know something is false, but where a core fear stops them from saying it. And this is something, I mean, this is something you see even if you're watching video content about prison, right? Where people will start sort of brainwashing, like, you a woman now. And like, there's a level, and we're not going to like make crude jokes about this or anything, but there's a level at which you can literally make a human being believe absurd nonsense. You can make them subservient. You can break their mind. This is what's done in gulags. This is what was done in concentration camps. This is what's done to prisoners of war with varying levels of success.
This is Solomon Ash, right? With regard to who will go along with the wrong answer because 3 or 4 people already said it.
No, we've talked about elite military units train people to resist this kind of thing. I mean, even people in normal society, to some extent, have differing levels of resistance to it. Even this is obviously 2 levels below that, but the sort of Socratic method screamed abuse in law school is designed to some extent to see if you will you will respond with aggressive actual answers in something like a courtroom setting, as opposed to the questions are all leading, and the idea is, will you just say what you're being prompted to, and you're not supposed to. That'll result in a C or D grade. So I think that's what happened to a lot of people with something like the trans stuff. Like, what a woman is. You're married. It's a relatively happy marriage, but you know that if you explain it in print, you might be fired. What happens then? So you just tell the lie. And when everyone tells the lie, people start believing that everyone believes the lie. And that's very dangerous for society. Anyway, I'm a long talker. Let's move on. Colin, so you've been involved in this. Did all you guys read this piece that just came out, The Lost Generation?
No.
Yeah,
No.
okay. In Compact.
Yeah. Okay. So, Colin, do you want to break it down for the panel just so I don't talk about it for 5 minutes?
I'm actually halfway through reading it. It's a long piece, but I know what it is. I mean, it details something that I've already known to be true for many years now. It outlines basically the rise of DEI that began in the early 2010s, maybe around 2013, 2014, and how this shift from um, I guess what was just standard affirmative action that was just kind of like this nod, wink, wink type. We're, giving some people of color, a leg up or whatever, or expanding the pool of applicants. It became much more explicit, like racial quotas. We're just not hiring white men anymore, basically. So it outlines with a lot of data and different areas in society where the demographic shift has just really just disfavored white guys, and also with personal stories about just overt cases of industries just blacklisting hiring white guys in favor of diversifying uh, their departments or their corporate meeting rooms and all that type of stuff. It's something that I experienced directly when I was in academia, which made me start looking for jobs elsewhere too. That's something we can talk about if you guys want to. I mean, I've been tweeting a lot about that lately.
Yeah, I think it's worth talking about. Now, we're going to drop a plug for a company that 3 or 4 of us are working for here for about 5-10 minutes of this. But that is, I think the topic's an interesting one. And Colin, I did want to talk about this for a serious reason. I mean, you've been kind of leading some of the discussion about this online. But for those in the audience that haven't read this yet, there's a piece called The Lost Generation that came out in Compact Magazine. And I do want to get the opinions from the panel. Is this a totally legitimate article? Is there some whining going on here? Is he underselling the problem because he's writing for a major publication? What are your thoughts? But basically, this guy breaks down some pretty hard numbers, and he says that if you look at the top 8% of jobs, if you look at culture creating positions, there's been a measurable decline in the number of white guys that have been hired that's really remarkable. So he doesn't just look at Caucasians, he breaks out white guys in one age range, millennial men, and he tracks the number of people in the youngest age cohort in his Stata or Excel or whatever that are hired over the period beginning in 2014. And it really is pretty crazy. I mean, so that cohort falls, if you look at the historians hired at Yale, for example, from what you'd expect, 38% or whatever it was, down to 7%. One of the UCs hired 76 professors in the time under review. I think 3 were white men. Someone might correct some of these numbers by 1 or 2. But in a lot of fields like television writing, it became suddenly almost impossible to get a job as a white guy unless you had some kind of weird diversity criteria. So I noticed that all of a sudden, like 38% of the people that were hired were Hispanic, and like, I kind of know what this is. A bunch of people were gay all of a sudden. It is what it is. Also, like, the incomes for white men didn't drop during this period. Another guy who's a liberal white male posted this data of all the people. So, like, people earning more than 50%, people earning above the 50th percentile in the white male bracket, the rate was something like 73% during this period. So a lot of these white guys seem to have dropped out of these sort of upper end jobs like academia and gone into things like crypto. So it's an interesting picture of what happened to the white male during what's now like a 12-year span. But the lost generation is the piece on white males. And it really shows the impact of DEI. It's tangible. It started about the time BLM did. The whole diverse panel here.
I want to say, as the token white on the panel, I really appreciate you guys keeping me on.
Colin Wright, now you have talked about this a lot. How did this impact you now you were in one of these fields. You were in academia in Research One universities. What was your experience with the DEI hiring process? Was this really something you saw?
I mean, it was absolutely everywhere when I was applying for jobs. So I got my PhD in 2018 and I was at Penn State. And so during those years, between 2018 and 2020, I was applying for jobs, even up through, the 2020 COVID, George Floyd stuff, when things got really crazy. But, most of the universities I was applying to you had to incorporate DEI in your research. Okay. And I studied the collective personalities of wasps and spiders. So there's not much you can do to contribute to DEI when you're studying those types of questions. I'd have to also submit a diversity statement that talks about like my commitment to DEI. What have I done in the past? What am I going to do while I'm at the university? And as woke as you can word these things is kind of what they're looking for. They're looking for the keywords or whatever in these types of statements. And this was the stuff I completely, disagreed with. I was being forced to sort of list all the minorities that I had mentored, and I did mentor some minorities, but I didn't choose them because they were minorities. They just happened to be like the best people for the job to work in the field with me. So it just felt weird that I'm just like trying to remember, like, there was this person, he was white, but maybe he was gay and I want to put him down. And then there was, me applying to jobs. You know, I had a very competitive CV for my career stage. I had close to 30 published papers. But just after 2 years as a postdoc, I had about 24 peer-reviewed papers right out of graduate school, which is a lot for a grad student. I saw my colleagues, my non-white colleagues who were in my same field, who even might have studied the same organisms that I studied, apply to the same jobs that I was studying, and I was just, looking at their Facebook pages, and they were just getting inundated with these, job interviews and job offers, and I'm not getting any callbacks whatsoever, even though their CVs are just immeasurably worse than mine. Like there's no way to square that circle of like, how's this person getting an interview and I'm not? Yeah, so I mean, I had a colleague. I'll be kind of vague. I don't want to know where, have people be able to find out who this person is, but this was a black woman who was offered a job at an Ivy League college, tenure track job, minutes after defending her PhD thesis, which was at UC Berkeley, and she had 0 published papers to her name. She had one that was tentatively accepted in a decent journal, not a great one, but accepted, given an offer at an Ivy League university for a tenure track job, which is just completely unheard of. You don't get these jobs until, it's usually your second professor job or third after like a long career and you're in your 50s, you get these types of jobs. So it was just really demoralizing to just realize that if I stay in this field, I'm going to have to just, either work just so much harder than anyone else is just to get the same result. And I don't even know if I'm going to get the same result. So I ended up sort of starting to branch out and apply to other jobs too while I was still applying to jobs in university, because I wanted to get something that would actually be correlated to my degree of input, the actual work I was doing. So it was everywhere, and it was totally demoralizing to be in that culture.
Fair enough. There's a lot there. I mean,
There's a lot.
let's move around the panel. Christy Kelly, what do you think about this? Are white guys facing discrimination? What's the extent of that? What are your thoughts?
I don't discount that they are facing discrimination, especially coming out of, the whole George Floyd era. I think it was just kind of an overcorrection that society was trying to make. I do think, especially in academia, I mean, it's always been extremely diverse compared to, like, let's say corporate America, where most corporate, 500 companies are still either white or Asian males, dominated at the top. I do think if you look at whether it's law school or colleges, especially the Ivy League schools, you do see a greater, intentionally, it seems like the schools try to make it so that it's more diverse. And they kind of do, I'm sure, put their finger on the scale. So I absolutely believe that, I would probably have more success at getting a job at Yale than I would maybe a Fortune 500 company where, the top is still, largely predominantly white male and/or Asians. Ironically, today, I think it was today, I saw that Trump came out and he's encouraging white men to file discrimination suits. That flashed across the screen. So I think that he does have his pulse on, kind of the white male rage that we've been experiencing in the country. And he is, at least verbalizing, hey, you guys don't have to take this, start filing lawsuits and fighting back.
Yeah, I think
I'll
that's
note
good.
too that I have taken legal action against Cornell just a little earlier this year, because it was revealed, my colleague at the Manhattan Institute, Chris Rufo, some emails were sent to him that showed that there was a secret job search at Cornell for an evolutionary biologist in 2020. At the time I was looking for jobs in this field, where the emails say specifically that, we do not want, we're looking for a diverse candidate. We're doing this as secretly because we don't want them to be in competition with non-diverse candidates. And it was just like as explicit as you could make it in an email. So I was contacted by the America First Policy Institute, and so we've filed like the EEOC complaint, and we're going after with some state lawsuits as well. So that's currently, in the works. But I think I have a pretty good case, especially since there was this active effort to suppress the information, which makes it so the statute of limitations clock doesn't start ticking until that the violation is actually unearthed instead of for when it occurred. So yeah, we'll see how that goes.
Yep. Good luck with that. Again, I have some comments on this, but I'll save them toward the end and make them quick. Charles Love, what do you think? You've been a boss. What's your feeling on the climate here in terms of discrimination? Have we moved to the point where there's open discrimination against men and against whites?
Yes, we have, but at the same time, I think, because this thing is so nuanced, it could be the facts are probably just murky enough that no one's happy, right? Everybody has a little bit of gets a little shine, and they all get a little discrimination. I think one, Colin, you made a little bit of a mistake. I think you gave us a little too much info. Everybody's not as smart as me. So I know that who you were talking about. You wanted to keep their identity suppressed. It was Claudine Gay. It was the president of Harvard. That's who it was. That had no papers, right? I mean, really. I mean, she wrote 2 papers. But anyway, I thought Christy's comment was interesting because I think we need to have a session with her because she mentioned the whites and the Asian men a couple times. I think there's a little tension there we need to poke at some point. But because I don't believe that that's the case, Christy. Now, obviously, it's certain places. So we talked about the universities, of course, but also government because they have a certain way that they act. So those are going to skew a lot higher in the forced diversity. And it shouldn't happen anywhere, but you're going to get more of that. In corporate America, you will get less of it because at the end of it, you want to still succeed. You don't want your company to fail. But then you'll be more likely to say, I'm not going to hire the Kendi, who's just a complete hack, right? Or the Nicole Hannah-Jones for a tenure track with no professional, well, she's got a bachelor's degree, no PhD, and never taught, whatever. But you're not going to go that far in corporate America. But you will say, okay, I got 5 candidates, and they're all moderately. There's a gap. They're okay. So as long as they're within our window, I don't mind skipping over the person who was probably next in line. But I'm not going to just take somebody that's completely incompetent. That said, in the corporations that I work with and for that I've seen, and the meetings I've been with, and the middle and upper management I know, still majority white men. But there's a lot. First of all, HR in corporate America is the university and government. I think that's pretty much 90% women now. So, but then even in others, they try to find a way. So what used to happen, it used to be, we're going to hire more minorities. So we have a lot of minorities in the entry-level positions. But the higher up you go, the wider and more male it would get.
That's important.
That's still kind of the case, except it gets to middle management, and then they jump and they will put a woman or a minority in a C-suite position, right? Or just below that, and then groom them, kind of the way Jamie Dimon's like, I'm going to step down and this is going to be my replacement. So they do stuff like that. So I don't know. Obviously, it's still more male dominated because it was so male dominated. It was so overrepresented. It would take a while to go back. But I still think in corporate America, they are making specific efforts, maybe trying to balance, which is hard to do, the airlines and others, trying to balance the competence level and say, we still want qualified people. But you could have, and that's the argument when I saw people attacking what Charlie Kirk said about the pilot. Now, whether you agree with him or not, you think it's racist, it's weird because you got to have some common sense, though. I don't think he was saying Black people are too stupid to learn how to fly a plane. He's saying that and I'm not even saying the person that got the job isn't qualified. What they're saying is if you got a really intense position that needs the highest skill level, and so you test them in certain ways, it's a fair test, whatever, and the top 10 people, you had 3 positions and the top 10 people, and there's a Black guy in that position and he's number 9, right? And you skip over the other people to give them a position. That's what they're saying is not fair. So it doesn't necessarily mean hiring or promoting someone who's not qualified or just totally like an extreme case of Colin and others, just freezing out whites. But it's also most people, if you take color out, just ask, fair-minded people, is it fair to do all of these tests to see who's the best qualified person and then skip the first five, right? You wouldn't skip the first five quarterbacks. You wouldn't skip the first five mezzo-sopranos, right? So why would you skip the first five evolutionary biologists? That's the issue. And that's why it's more nuanced, because it's not just like, I'm just going to hire the first Black person I see or somebody who can't do the job. And clearly you look at this person and they're an idiot. How'd they get the job? No, they could probably do the job. That you just skipped all these other people. So that's the reason why it's hard to do. So yes, it's happening. Some are more open about it and saying we don't want so Collins was extreme, right? It was a cloak and dagger, separate interviewing process. But I know you remember 2 years ago, it was openly published that of the top 300 companies, that the positions that they posted in 2021 or 2022, like 90% of them went to a minority. But of course, last thing I'll say, and to the Black people who have this mixed mind, because on the one hand, down with Whitey and they want to, pro-Black, but then they're smart enough to understand that a lot of this DEI hurts them because it's not Black anymore. Even when it was cool when it was Black and we were, the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow, so we need ours. But of course, you're going to have more diversity when you open up diversity to everything, right? If I, as a straight white male, can't get my application through to get an interview, and then I suddenly say I identify as a woman, especially since the gender expression, we're going back to where we started, says you don't even have to be transitioned, it's however you express yourself. And instantly he becomes a minority. His resume goes from the garbage pail to the top 3 of the pile, and everybody's, we have to hear his voice and all that kind of stuff. Her voice, I don't know what's that. But obviously, if you do that, more people will do it. So if diversity is the T, but it's also Indian, except that when they don't want Asians, but they can conveniently do it, it's any, what do they call it? Person of color. If every person of color identifies, Black people are starting to learn that it doesn't mean Black anymore. And if they're pro affirmative action, that's what affirmative action was for. So that is the DEI problem that nobody seems to have figured out a way to solve. Not those of us fighting it, although we're trying, and not the people who say, well, I like it, except when it includes, lets men come into women's spaces, or when it includes Asian kids and not Blacks, then, there's no way to make a perfect mix of it.
Boom. All right. Good summary there from Charles. I have like a few quick written notes. So like writing down from what you guys said, there obviously is a bias in hiring. Like Charles, you touched on some of this, but like I pulled this up on my phone while we were talking. In the Ivy League, at least the admissions bias, Black people got an average of 135-point SAT advantage applying. The disadvantage for Asians was almost as severe. This is versus whites, by the way. It was like 95 points. So you did see all this bullshit in the application process, and I'm sure they made up some reason for it. Like we had better personalities and Asians had terrible ones.
Terrible social skills.
Yeah, I mean, just like the keeping out Jews level stuff. I mean, just ridiculous. So that is there. Like what Colin's saying is correct. And I mean, if you're talking about people that are reasonably competent, like even the less qualified African American one that had 1 or 2 decent journal publications within that range, I mean, like an advantage like that is going to be massive. It's the equivalent of getting a 2-minute advantage in a distance race in high school or college. Like, so that bias is there, and it kept out a lot of well-qualified white guys. One of the things about this also is that it's due to the idea of proportional representation. So that doesn't mean no whites got hired. What it means is that if your group includes 70% of the most qualified people, but it only gets 50% of the slots, your group's going to have a brutal race. Whereas if my group gets 11% of the slots, but includes 3% of the most qualified people, we're going to have a pretty easy race. So it doesn't mean that like in corporate executive suites, you're going to see all Black dudes. You're going to see 11% Black dudes. And we've all been in these hiring roles, I think. It's just like, I'm going to have a much easier path there. And I kind of recognize that actually. Well, it's not me because I'm a well-known controversial writer who's only half Black. Like I might not get hired at all, but like, you get what I'm saying. Like an average African-American male, had I been a liberal who hadn't talked shit online at the Facebook level for a couple of years before getting on Twitter, who knows? I love K-State, but I might be at Yale. So it's a complex game. There are a lot of variables in your model, right? And I think one thing about this also is that a lot of these elite fields don't pay very well. So I can't get past that point that like whites were making 80% of the money, 73% of the money, no reason to exaggerate, after the discrimination. Like a lot of those intelligent white guys, they didn't become homeless. They got kicked out of academia, magazine journalism, so on, and they went into crypto. I mean, so like they did what black conservatives have always done. They sold Cadillac Escalades or something. So there's a prestige penalty that they took. That's literally what we did. That's how the Escalade became a black car. There was a coalition between the black upper middle class and non-biased white dealerships and so on. But I mean, so is that fair? Probably not. But like Colin became one of the better known kind of independent journalists in the country. So I do think a lot of people took that path. Again, enough people are angry about this happening to them or to their buddies who happen to be Caucasian that now we're saying, okay, this is illegal too. But I don't know if the lost generation is entirely appropriate. I will tell you, I looked up Mr. Savage. When he says, I scalp tickets from my house, bro, I'm not going to reveal everything about you. I don't know how legal that is. But if you look this guy up, his house is in a pretty nice place, and his ticket selling business is like one of the first two or three you find online. So let's just leave that there. You don't just get a writing deal with Compact Magazine. So yeah, not everyone failed. Nonetheless, racism is bad. And that's actually a pretty good segue into something I mentioned earlier. Many of us on the panel actually have helped found a company that is focused on taking DEI out of companies. It's Unified Solutions America. And the idea is that we are one of the first prominent anti-DEI, anti-affirmative action consulting brands. Sort of our three-part model is that we'll go into your business. We'll have everything from individualized AI to consultants like some of the people you see here, including moi, review your praxis, review your materials, take out some of the language that's crept in over the past decade or more. Two, we can actually do personalized presentations on the roots of a lot of this stuff, many of which go back to Marx and before. And three, we can provide an alternative based on kind of elite culture from military special forces and the like. So I don't know how much of a, like, I don't want to do a full ad presentation here, but I mean, the three of you guys are actually working with this company. So like, Brooks, what's your take on like the USA model? What's your take on kind of consulting, rising up and trying to get rid of DEI? Christy,
I
you
think
can comment on how much boasting we do at the end and how serious you think that idea you think this is. But Brooks, what's your take on this?
well, so what we're doing is fairly strategic because right now the market is waiting and watching. All right, they're anybody who's followed this long enough to understand the long march through the institution, and then the lull, and then political correctness, and then the lull, and then 2013 woke, George Floyd, trans, all of it. What they do is they advance and wait and advance and wait and advance and wait. And so anybody that thinks this has gone away, anybody who thinks that is mistaken. So the market is waiting and watching. These companies that say they're reversing their DEI policy are actually rebranding it. They're moving it into, inclusiveness and belonging and all of these other pseudonyms for the same thing. And they're moving personnel around because they're waiting. And the market is waiting and watching. And so what we're doing in our strategic rollout is to give the average American small retail investor a voice to move the needle in the market, right? To send a market signal that this is not going away, that the demand to return to merit is not going away. And so that's been a part of our strategic move. In terms of our methodology, I mean, we have people, right? McKinsey knows how to roll out DEI, but our consultants understand the source code of DEI. I don't think most of the consultant class understands the origins of this stuff. The fact that white skin privilege is directly linked to the Prairie Fire Manifesto of the Weather Underground. Like this is the most radical of the most radical, and this is the praxis of critical theory. And so once you understand that, you can look at the books, you can look at the policies in the company and tease out anything that is rooted in that. And it's very subtle. So a lot of consultants that do this are at a disadvantage because they don't understand the source code of DEI. DEI is a praxis of critical theory, of critical race theory.
Yeah, and the reason you mentioned we're talking about this is that Colin actually is one of the people doing some consulting with this company. Charles is Local Distance Online. Michael Young is. So when you say a lot of these people, I actually, both of us are part owners of the company. So when you say that the people that are doing this understand the roots of some of this stuff, I think that's true. But Charles, what do you think about all this? What are your expectations for us? But also, what can the sort of the sane side of the business world do to get rid of this stuff that we kind of helped introduce, or that our peers did?
I think that, one thing that I think is really important as an approach and a point to point out is to go into a company and ask them, because it's a for-profit business. They're trying to build a mousetrap. They're trying to make money on that mousetrap. Why do you think focusing so much energy, time, and money on this is beneficial to the core mission of your company? And then I explain to them why they're wrong. Now, granted, this was earlier on in the madness, but I give an example. So I'm on a call. It's mostly middle management and executive, but just below C-suite, probably 40 people on the call. It was a business call, right? We were talking about, the nuts and bolts. And so this is post George Floyd. So they open up talking about, well, they want everybody to talk about they were saying stuff like all the keywords. They were saying, bring your whole self to work. They want you to feel this, that, or the other. Now I work, you keep in mind, I'm working with let's just call it skilled labor. These are not the people who went to college to get, a social studies degree of any type, right? And so they're all listening and talking, and it's like, come on, participate. No, it's kind of quiet, and eventually people start talking. So they ask them a question, what do you think? Well, we're going to make a commitment to hire more diverse people. We're going to do this. We're going to do all this stuff. So, and then I ask them, what do you think? And no one's really saying anything. So I was going to say something, but I wanted to hear what people will say. And then a couple of the people on the call started to IM me, right? And they're like, look, I just want to work. I don't want to talk about this. I'm not going to say anything. Are you going to say anything? And they're like, this is stupid. Can't we just do our job? So it's like 5 or 6 people I'll say about 5 or 6 people of saying this. So of course I always got to be the guy. So I'm saying, okay, I'm listening to you. I'll say something. I'm saying, listen to you talk. And I think it's fascinating. I appreciate the sentiment that you want to give people an opportunity if they're locked out, if that's the case. But we're on this call. Everyone on the call is a manager at some level. And I'm looking at the names and some of these people I know, the majority of them are minorities, right? Not one of them probably, I can't speak for them all, and I don't want to do that, but I'm telling you, because I'm not calling you out, because I'm not saying the names, they feel like saying something. They are sending me messages right now during this call, saying they're uncomfortable with the tone of this conversation. They think it's useless. They think it being led by some white man who's making them feel better is not helping anything. And they don't feel like they're losing any opportunity. They feel like you're patronizing them. And then a couple of them said, I'll admit that I'm one of the people that I am too. Right. So once people felt that they were comfortable to speak up, they were like, this is going too far. We just got a job to do. I want to do my job and go home. I don't need to, in our core mission, to be talking about whether I belong and what my kids are doing in a group setting. So I think that for a lot of these people, assuming the best, which is hard these days, some of them are doing it because they think it's what the people want. And in reality, it's not what their employees want. Most of them, even the most cynical employee who doesn't really love his job, makes a decent amount of money. I'm talking about if they're in corporate America, and they're a corporate employee making decent money. It's like, I don't love my job, but I get paid well. I don't hate it. It's cool. I get along with my boss. But I'm not trying to be buddies with anybody. I'm not trying to make this my life. I have a life outside here. I want to come here, do a good job of what you're hiring me to do, and then I want to go home. So they don't need all this extra stuff because they don't care. But somehow, some way, we've convinced HR, which we know skews a certain way, and then the C-suite managers who can't be involved, who just say rubber stamp stuff, that this is beneficial to their business. So once they realize, one, that it's not, and that you're excluding some really good people like Colin, who can't get an application in through that wall of HR, and that the people that you have there that you're trying to make feel comfortable are just annoyed by what you're doing, maybe it'll make it easier for them to back away from it. So we can come up with the ways of explaining how they can, get out of it, but they need to understand that it's necessary.
Yeah. I mean, I think a core point there is that your business should do like the thing it's there to do and not try to be friends with you. Like Nike's job is to sell shoes, not to like do outreach to the inner cities of the world or whatever. But Colin, what do you think about this? What do you think of the USA concept? We're going to go into these companies. We're going to show them the roots of DEI. We're going to rip it out. Is that going to work?
I think it will work because I think a lot of the people who are pushing this stuff, a lot of the companies that have these DEI policies that they've adopted, they probably don't know what they're even doing. They probably don't know where this ideology came from or that they're even spouting an ideology. They were probably some group came in and gave a few talks and gave them this system of, this whole lexicon that to describe what they're doing, the equities, the diversities, the inclusions, um, it, all these words, they have this double meaning and they usually sound pretty good. And so, but often the people that are leading this stuff, like a lot of the HR people, I wouldn't even classify them as true believers. They're just doing what they think is probably like this corporate speak, but it's actually just the tip of this iceberg of this ideology. And I think what we can do and what the company can do is really help just be kind of like this Rosetta Stone to these companies who might not even know that they are promulgating these ideologies in their workplace culture that is actually leading to these terrible outcomes. It's destroying the workplace environment, how people are interacting with one another. And most of what I do when I'm working to try to get DEI or gender stuff out of the government is really just say, here's the language game that's being played on all these fronts, because it's always a language game. It's always taking these words and having double meanings for it. Like the word gender means like 7 different things depending on who you ask. And these often get exploited. Like equity doesn't mean equality, but it kind of sounds similar to it, but it really just means racial quotas, and you're just sort of rejiggering the outcomes based on because you feel like you just need more people represented in this one workplace environment. So a lot of it is kind of just exposing and staying in plain English what this is actually doing, what these words are going into the paperwork of the company, and actually finding these terms, explaining what they mean, and getting them rooted out of there and replacing them with words that actually have common sense meanings that everyone understands and can actually be implemented to have real better outcomes. So I think that's sort of the selling point, the least I'm excited about for the company.
These companies have bought the Mott, right? Mott Bailey, and
Exactly.
we're illuminating the Bailey, right? This is what they actually mean by this. And I teach this, and I teach a business class at HBCU that Will also is a professor. A lot of my students are buying this language, and they're bringing it with them. And when we talk about it, one of the things that I actually do is we look at competitive pools, and we start. I usually have a reasonable representation of football players, business-minded football players in my business class, and we talk about Asian cornerbacks in college football. It's like, so
The best.
right. So we look at the general percentage of the population of each race, and then we talk about the fact that 90% of college cornerbacks are black. And cool. And the last I checked, there were 2 Asian cornerbacks in all of college football, right? So when you're pulling from a competitive pool, it's the pool that's going to tell the story, not the general population. So then we turn that on to aerospace engineering, and it's 90% male. So then we run an exercise. If you've got 1,000 engineers, 900 of them are going to be men and 100 of them are women, and the top quartile is going to be 25 women and 225 men. If you're hiring 100 people, if you're a company and you're saying we're going to hire half women engineers in this aerospace company, well, you got 25 and you got to hire 75, or you've got to lower the quality. I mean, it's math. The quality has to be reduced in those circumstances because the maths. So that's been an interesting exercise. I think a lot of the students actually kind of understand that, and rather than looking at outcomes as a general percentage of the population, they have to look at that middle step, because that's human freedom, that's interest. Right? Women aren't as interested in engineering as men are. And Peterson's talked all about that with regard to men being more interested in things and women being more interested in people. And that's just general interest and free will.
Yeah, Christy.
Yeah, Christy Kelly got a chance to jump on that. But Christy Kelly, what do you think about the USA idea, anti-DEI consulting? Any other final comments before we do our last word?
Yeah, I guess my one comment is Charles kind of hit the nail on the head is you're going to have two different groups. You're going to have one group that is probably thrilled to throw away their DEI stuff and they just need to know, how to unroll it. So that's going to be an instant, client for you all. But the bigger pool is going to be those people that actually think they're doing good in a voluntary situation where they're not being compelled by a government mandate or something to roll it back. How are
Or
you going to
mob.
get your foot through the door, to help those people? And then also, I remember Vivek Ramaswamy used to talk about this a lot. He said a lot of the DEI stuff is not because they necessarily want to do good, but it was actually easier for them to just make a simple DEI standard because before DEI, they actually had, different tangible things they would do maybe in the community or outreach or whatever. So they've kind of rolled back doing any actual good and just have a simple DEI, statement, and then they're not really doing anything. So how are you going to reach those people is just was running through my mind who are just comfortable with just the statement or think that they're doing good. And that's going to be, I think, the hard group to sell.
It's a good point. They might not pay us, honestly. Like if they don't want to do anything, like if we say, well, this is the way to actually get a non-racist culture, and you'll still wind up with like 5% Asians and 8% blacks or whatever, and they're just like, nah, we'd rather do this bullshit. Like we'll probably just be like, it's not a fit. I mean
But you
that's
get
honestly
the
like
other people and you make them so successful that they come to you because they need to compete.
yeah. One of the things that was really interesting, and kind of last comment on this, but like when we did our first meeting, which had a lot of the like senior consultants, quote unquote, and had all the advisors and so on. And I think both the guys in the meeting here are both. But it was like we had like four black guys, including Ian Rowe. We had like an Asian woman, Mel Chin. We had like a half Jewish, half Irish guy from Chicago, and it was like we went around the panel, and there was kind of a question. Somebody asked, like, "Did you pick these people intentionally?" I was like, "Well, no, nobody thought about it at all. These are just the people that were good at this." And I think very often that's pretty much what you're going to get. So there's a question of whether how much of this was necessary in the first place that a lot of people just don't want to ask. I mean, MIT got rid of all racial quotas, and I think they're probably giving some slight 2% edges, but I think they were 6% black, 7% Hispanic, 28% Asian, like 50% white, counting Jewish. Like, look at it, it looked fine to me. But I mean, if you want everyone to be exactly proportionally represented, that's where you get into the problem. And that doesn't happen anywhere in nature.
Yeah.
All right. Um, Actually, that's going to be my final word if we're doing these like 30-second wrap-ups. That's actually a good point that Tom Sowell made years ago. Like the idea that in a race-neutral society or sex-neutral society, you'd wind up with exact proportional representation of people that's just bullshit. It's an old mathematically illiterate idea that somehow survived in the law. I don't know how it has, but that doesn't happen anywhere. If you look at the National Hockey League, my fiance has recently gotten into like watching hockey. I don't think it's the season right now, but there are leagues in Europe or something on our TV package. Hockey players at the pro level are about 98% Caucasian males because whites are pretty good athletes and they have ice in the countries they live in. So you're not going to see a massive representation of Southern Africans in professional hockey for no reason other than the fact that it's warm there. And there are hundreds of differences like this between men, women, groups around the world. So if you have MIT and it's like 13% Black and Latino, 30% Asian, 50% Caucasian, I don't think you have a problem at all. And that's probably a healthy starting point. All right, Brooks Crenshaw, what do you think?
Yeah. So back to the point on the first conference call when we realized, hey, we're like a DEI poster child company, and we hired organically, and that's we're going to facilitate our clients to do. Hiring on merit. It's there's a certain bit of actual racism in the notion that you have to like we hired the most brilliant people on the subject, and it turned out to look like how most companies want to look through DEI, right? And there's no pandering, there's no, well, we have to, and so in the corporate space, there's this assumption that without the bending of the rules, certain people based on the color of their skin can compete. And I think that we need to shine that light back onto the corporate space. And also, Colin, I really appreciate you being on here. Really enjoy your work and excited to work with you.
Thanks for having me on. I'm jazzed about it. I've been trying to fight DEI and systems that are not merit-based for the last 7, almost 8 years. So I'm happy to be doing it for you guys.
All right. Charles Love, what are your last words of wisdom?
I'll keep it short and sweet. One, I like your point about the proportionality and the example of hockey, but to make it even finer, they may be mostly white, but in NHL, which is an American hockey sports league, it's hard to get an American white in there because they're all Eastern European or Canadian.
Canadian, yeah.
Yeah, look at the top 20 players of all time. I think 3 of them are American.
They got more
Right.
ice, more ice in Canada.
Right. So is that racist? I would just like to say, end by saying what I say all the time, because I think it's important to keep beating it over the head, is that I want everything because this is a problem. So lawsuits, Chloe and Colin doing their thing. I want legislation if you can do it, if it's fair, all the things. But we need to, address this culturally, right? There's a real problem. I opened with 2 questions to Colin about the gender thing, and there's a real problem that what we thought were normal, educated people who weren't trying to make money off of the DEI thing started going around tweeting on Mother's Day. They probably tweet too, but on Mother's Day, happy birthing person's day and things of that nature. And just yelling at you in all caps, trans women are women. Again, giving them an argument, forget that they're wrong. Why are you yelling that? I mean, nobody even asked you. You just, there's a cultural problem, whether it's buying into a narrative or being brainwashed, whatever the case may be. We have to address the culture, and I think the company is going to be moving in that direction to try to, make that happen. Because although it's a corporate, business, corporations are trying to follow the winds of the culture.
Definitely. All right. We're just going counterclockwise. So Colin Wright, you are normally the guest finishes up, but you are the next person. What do you think? Last word of wisdom.
Last word of wisdom. Oh God. Again, I think I'm just happy to be part of the company to remove DEI from this type of stuff, remove these ideologies that are anti-merit. As someone who's experienced it firsthand in the field of academia. Now, I know that corporate America is a little different, but I think, they deserve to have a merit-based system. I think companies will really appreciate sort of the merit-based approach because I think it'll make them more competitive. And at the end of the day, I think that's what matters the most. So, yeah, thanks for having me on board.
Boom. Thanks for coming on board, and also thanks for coming on the show today. And Christy Kelly, last word to you. To
Yeah, I
a
just want to.
strong Black woman.
Oh goodness, I get so upset when my husband makes that joke.
Not a joke, really, but I mean, but go. Well, last word of wisdom, dude.
Okay, so Colin said something about the next generation and how there's still really high numbers that are buying into the whole, trans thing. And I think I'm the only one here with teen kids. And there's been an absurd number of times that I've picked my daughter up from school and I've had to ask her, is that a guy or a girl? Because you just can't tell anymore. And I really think that for the sake of our kids, I think we have to be compassionate, but in being compassionate is not buying into the delusion. And it kind of goes to what Charles was saying. It's going to be the culture, it's going to be this next generation coming up, and it's just going to be like a reality to them. Like, no, this is not, okay, there are 2 genders, and being compassionate but also not buying into, their whole delusional thing that they have going on.
Well, you might be the only one with teen kids, but they're teaching it in elementary school. So that's how you see teens like that. It's because kindergarten through 3rd grade, they're being hammered at a young, impressionable age. I saw it on the school board here and in my kids' classroom before I took them out of that crazy, insane school.
Fair enough. And that might be the through line here. There are powerful people that, I mean, that's what ruling class means, right? There are powerful people that create the things that we see in society. All of us are fairly close to that. We're not quite there yet, though. And the thing is, what do you do about the people that are? You challenge them or you listen to what they say. You obey the rules or you don't. That might be the closing message for today. And on that note, thanks for watching Cut the Bull.
I got a country to say. Patriot J, I'm saving the day. Patriot J, I'm saving the day from you commies who lame. No, you can't fuck with me. I got a country to say. God bless the US of A. Land of the free and the home of the brave. God get all of the praise. I got a country to say, cause I'm Patriot J and I'm saving the day.